All right, so this is where we left off. Got this project set up in Descript 261 ready to go. Again, I'll probably say this, a million times throughout all of these different videos. You might develop your own templates, folder structure, naming conventions, etc. For us, we have things on the left-hand side, episode. So we have like a little SOP that just kind of reminds, as we're editing, the distinct features of this show. Some have teasers, some have intros, some have ads, etc., etc. So we have a little SOP that we keep in here just for reference, the episode itself, and then in my template, Descript will kind of create these folders by default as you start throwing files in here. But just to keep it organized, we have an assets folder, and then the multi-track sequence, and the project files are nested here, so we can just again, keeping things kind of clean. So I have the episode imported and ready to go. The first thing I'll do is try to find the start and end points of the episode. I'll see if there were any requests from the client, like, hey, definitely take this out, or hey, don't forget to highlight, this part of the conversation. Sometimes those things will be left for us as we go in. If you're editing your own show, obviously you already know those kind of things. If you're a freelancer, producer, editing a client show, I always ask for those things when they send footage over, just stuff that I wouldn't know about when I'm listening through. I checked, this one has no notes, which is great. So I'm just going to find the start and end points, kind of build out like a very quick skeleton of the episode structure, and then dive in and start editing. Every time you close and open Descript, it kind of changes the interface. It defaults like this. So I'll usually shuffle a couple things around before I dive in, just the way I prefer them. So for example, I really need this track at the bottom to be larger. And I'll talk a lot about that as we go through, but I like seeing the transcript and the region, the track, the waveform, whatever you want to call this down here at the same time. It's important. If you haven't already, take a look at the hotkeys for these items here in the editing window. Select, which is your main mouse, is A. Select range is R, so you can grab like a particular range of the waveform. Blade is B, so you can trim, like clip the waveform at a particular spot. I don't use the drag tool, the hand tool. And then for zooming in and out, at least on the Mac, you can zoom up to pull it out and view more of the waveform, or you can scroll down to zoom in, as opposed to like the pinch zoom. You can kind of scroll up and down to zoom in quickly. So I like that. If you prefer, you can also use this slider to zoom. Okay, so let's see what we got here. There usually is a little bit of preamble before we jump in, whether it's them talking to each other or prepping, or maybe they record a separate intro, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it's easy to see if you zoom out a little bit and see what the waveform looks like. So for example, this is what I expect to see. This is much louder than this over here, which shows me kind of just from experience that they were probably talking off mic or prepping, talking before they get started. If you're editing for clients or editing your own show, if you have the ability to do a slate, that is awesome. This show is also in video. The video footage isn't in here right now. Again, I'll talk about that in a separate video. But if you're able to do a slate, whether it's just like a very loud single clap, or if you actually have like a physical slate, that's good, because that will usually give you a great marker as to where the episode begins. So they don't have a physical slate, but they do one for me and do a clap at the very beginning of the recording session. So I have all of this preamble stuff, but I can see right here is my slate, and right here the episode begins. So this is usually the clear marker of where I want to get things trimmed up. So I'm going to take my blade tool and trim right before the episode actually begins. And all of this before, I'm going to strike through, also called ignore in Descript. So this will be kind of like a backbone of how we edit, and how I suggest you edit as well, is that we never truly delete anything. So Descript is non-destructive editor, and then as we import this into Logic Pro or any DAW after the fact to finish the master audio. That's also non-destructive. So we want the ability to bring any edits back at any point if we need to. So as you're editing, you can use the strike through button here or command delete instead of delete. So it will delete it in the waveform area because that audio is no longer going to play because I've struck through it. But you can see in the transcript area, I have everything. It's just struck through and grayed out. So let's say I messed this up. I actually do want to start the episode here. You could just highlight this, hit command delete again, and bring it back. So almost all of our edits are going to be like that unless we're trimming silence. Okay, and then once I do know where the episode is going to begin, I'm going to make a return line. As far as episode structure goes, we use markers to block out a couple things in the episode. I'll talk through those. This show doesn't get every single feature or segment, but I will talk through all the different options that we will usually pull here. For example, the show does not get a teaser, but sometimes if we do have a show that has a teaser, we'll put that at the very top. What that means is like a 10 to 30 second clip later in the episode that we put at the very, very top of the episode. So I'll do teaser here. And then we like to use, instead of, if you've edited on Descript, you probably know how to make gap clips and just like gaps of silence, which works kind of, but we prefer to actually write in a physical gap here, because if you put the gap clip in, it's hard to tell in the transcript where it's actually latched onto. And so what I mean by that is, like, if I put a gap clip here, I don't know if it's kind of tied to the word like, or if it's tied to the word not. And if I'm moving things around, or if I, do an extra return line, half the time the gap clip disappears because it's not anchored to something specific. So we like to actually type these in. If you type something into Descript that doesn't have audio attached to it, it's going to create like a placeholder for like how long it thinks that these two words are, and it's just going to be a gap of silence. So if you were to export this into Logic or any DAW, you'll see an actual gap here before the region, before the waveform begins. So whenever we have a section break, we include this little segment gap, just text here. So like I would paste the teaser up here. Segment gap will basically create a separation between this and the next section. And then here is where the episode actually begins. So this show does not have a separate intro, but I would follow the same process. If the show did have an intro, I would create that with a marker. And actually, sorry, I kind of glossed over that. To create a marker, you can hit the plus sign up here and actually click to create one, but the shortcut is Command-Shift-M, just to drop a marker in here. And markers, once you do put them, they will show up here in the transport. You can see all of your markers. So the very header of the episode, and then each marker as you add it will appear here, just so you can jump to those very quickly. So again, intro, this show doesn't have one, but I would put this here, segment gap, and then finally we get to the bulk of the episode, and we would call that interview. Usually, even if it's not an actual interview, like for example, this one doesn't have a guest, I'm just going to call it interview anyways, just for the sake of consistency. And then I will scroll to the very end of the episode, and I'll basically do the reverse. So I'm going to just try to find out where the episode actually ends. And now so these girls have a sign off, so I usually know by looking at the transcript or the audio where that actually ends, but sometimes you might need to kind of play through a little bit just to figure out where that is.
And we hope it serves one of you out there and helps you with a difficult situation.
Cool. They didn't do the sign off, so let's just snip this here and do that. Cool. Okay, I'm just going to check really quick because this looks different than I'm used to in normal episodes, so they might have changed things up. Okay, and here's a huge gap of space here. So here's their ending little tagline. Looks like they have started recording intros for this show, which is I wasn't aware of, but that's totally fine. So what we're going to do is figure out where this intro starts and ends, and we're going to cut and paste that to the top of the episode. So again, this is, you never know exactly, if you're not recording this yourself, you never know exactly what they're going to record and how they're going to record it. We asked them to do it the same way every time. Sometimes they change things up. It's no big deal. So it looks like they did start recording intros, and they've started doing them at the very end of the episode. So I'm going to block this off. I'm going to take this whole section. I'm going to cut and back up where my intro section is. I actually am going to use it, so I'll paste that in here. And now here's a clear example where you can see I got the intro, which ends, segment gap separates it from the interview. And that looks like this in the transcript. All right, so now I know where the actual end of the episode is. If we had a separate outro for this show, which we do not, then I would, just like the original markers, I would do one final section here, one segment gap, a marker to do outro, and then I would paste or move the audio here for the actual outro of the show. But let's get rid of that. This show does not have one. So this is the end. I don't bother putting that segment gap marker at the very, very end because there's nothing that's going to come after that. So no worries. Okay. Intro, boom. I'm going to just delete the teaser because the show doesn't have it now that you've seen exactly how we put that together. Now, if you did have production notes from this show, or if you knew, like if you were recording this is your episode and you wrote down and we got disconnected at, X minutes or whatever, this is the time where I would go and add those things in, typically before we start editing. So let's say, for example, they said, the guest cuts out at 15 minutes. You would try to find that and just highlight that for you. So let's say, for example, like this is something that needs to be removed or what have you. You can leave a comment. So click the comment icon here, or the shortcut for that is Command-Option-M. And you could just say, client request, remove this section or something. I try to get those shouldn't say markers. I try to get those production notes in there early before you start editing so you can go through and these things are apparent and they're there as you get through to that part of the episode. The request, the note is in front of your face, and it makes it easier to just address that when you get to it. In certain cases, I might also create the ad breaks now. So depending on the show, like we have some that get 4 ad breaks, some that get 1, some that get 0. This show has 1 ad break. So if I can see an obvious spot that's about halfway through the episode, which is where their placement is supposed to be for the ad break, I will sometimes just go ahead and make that ad break before I start editing if there's a clean break. So for example, I can see the main bulk of the episode, since I haven't made any cuts yet, is still this big chunk. I can tell where the voices change back and forth. This is 2 hosts, no guest, but if you were doing 1 host and 1 guest, it would be the same kind of process. You can see that it color codes the different speakers. So I can see like where, for example, here's a question here, this pink speaker, and then here's their answer in orange. So typically an ad break is going to go after a question has been answered, nice resolution before the next question picks up. So for example, if I zoom in here right before this pink voice picks back up, this might be a good spot for an ad break. Of course, you want to listen.
Go. As we all know, being on the side of being let go, it ends up being some of the best things can happen to you. Do you agree? What are you thinking?
I just want to dig into the situation a little bit more, but I don't know if you want to.
Do it, yeah.
Like, I think we're specifically talking.
So this is actually a good spot. I would clean this up anyways when I go through to do the edit. So I'll just do it now, leave the ad break in there. That way it's done and ready to go. So because she doesn't really follow up and answer the question here, it starts, it sounds like I just want to dig into this, is kind of going into a new section of the episode. So what we're going to do is kind of ditch this where she doesn't answer. I'm going to peel back this region so that it ends right after this last bit of waveform here. And then just like we created a segment gap at the beginning by typing it in, we're just going to put add marker here, write it in, bold, highlight, and then we do like to also comment. You can put add marker, add break, doesn't matter. So a note on comments, I like to put them anything that needs addressed. So for example, I put the add marker in here, but I also need to be aware of that when I put this into Logic to do the final master. So anything that I have to, or someone else on the team has to take action on or make a note of, should be a comment. That way, when I get to that step, I check the add break, I put a marker in Descript in Logic, and then I can resolve it to check it off. Typically, if it doesn't need actioned by you or by somebody else down the line, it doesn't need a comment at all. Examples of that could be production notes like we talked about earlier, ad breaks like this, things that you specifically want the client to review, like, hey, I think this is questionable, we should probably remove it, and then let them make that final decision. Those are things that could be commented on so that they can action that down the line. So add marker is good, and the show only gets one. So that's in place. And now with all of that out of the way, I can go back to the beginning and I can just start breezing through this edit, which we will get to shortly.